Hello, dear listeners. Today we'll be talking Michael Chabon's 2012 novel, Telegraph Avenue. This is the penultimate episode in our Michael Chabon read-through series, and what a journey it's been so far. After Chabon's full genre writing adventures following Cavalier and Clay's Pulitzer Prize win, Telegraph Avenue finds Chabon returning to literary realism, albeit with a more ambitious bent. It's a slice-of-life story about a record store at the intersection of Oakland and Berkeley, California, and it features Chabon's most diverse cast of characters yet, from the black and Jewish owners of the record store to the wives of those characters who run a midwife operation. It's a novel that purports to say something about race relations in America, as it's influenced by the beginning of Barack Obama's second presidential term, but as to what it says, and whether or not John and I agree with it, you'll have to listen to the episode to find out. This is the first Chabon book, and book on the podcast for that matter, that John and I both are a bit critical of for reasons we'll cover on the podcast, but to summarize, we discuss the influence of the Wire television show on this book, the bubble of second Obama term liberalism, and I make a pun-based analysis of the frequency of parrots in the later half of Chabon's writing that causes John physical pain. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Well, let's get this over with.
Yeah, let's actually, John, this was, you remember, like, we haven't read a bad book yet. It's like, I think this is the one that's like, while not horrible, it was not great, I guess, is how I would describe it. But
this, Ben, I'm going to be frank with you. I only finished this book this afternoon. I have every time I have confronted the idea of reading more of Telegraph Avenue, I've considered putting a gun to my head instead. Without a doubt, this is Michael Chabon's worst novel. It might be one of the most noxious cultural products I have ever had the misfortune of experiencing.
Yeah, like, John, you were imagining a gun pointed to your head. Similarly, I was imagining, what Netflix show would I be watching if I wasn't reading this? Like it just felt like I was like, you know what, I probably would have been watching like a really bad Netflix show, and like, this is the version of that, where it's like, I'm gonna check in with all these characters that I love, like, and like
This is like the one of his books where I'm like, how hasn't this been made into like a bad HBO miniseries?
Well, and I do wonder if that's like because it started kind of like as one, which we can get into, and like they did a reboot of High Fidelity, which was like with a more diverse cast. And I wondered if like whoever did that, because I didn't follow that breadcrumb trail, but I was like, I wonder if anyone who did that, they had also read Telegraph Avenue for some reason and were like, I should do that. But yeah, John, this was a perfect run. 40 strikeouts ended by reading Telegraph Avenue. We just read 40 banger books, one after the other, no misses. And then we read this one and I was like, ooh, like reading it. But
hello, listener. Welcome back to the Infinite Library.
I'm your host, Ben.
I'm your host. I can't even come up with a funny thing to say here because this book made me sad.
Yes, listener, imagine you're standing around the bookstore and it's your two favorite bookstore owners, me and John, and we're on the desk and we're declaiming, we're talking about our favorites, and then this book comes up and we both give it 2 thumbs down, and everybody in the bookstore laughs, and you know it's almost like a microcosm of society, John.
So little preamble before we really get into the meat of it, because I do, as much as I didn't like this book, Michael Chabon at least managed to create something interesting.
Yes, and I think we were well equipped to sort of see what he was doing, having like read everything up to this. But I also feel like this is in some ways like quite a swerve from what I think he's good at and from what we enjoy reading by him.
Yes, but what I was going to say was, so Ben, when I floated this project to you, I had a certain idea of like what it was going to look like. You know, I think, you know, I've been pretty upfront. You know, I'd read some of his like middle period books. I'd read like Cavalier and Clay, Yiddish Policeman's Union, and Gentleman of the Road. And I was like, those are 3 books I like. I think that there's like tons to talk about there. We'd already kind of talked a little bit about Chabon in one of our earlier episodes about kind of him as someone who was doing kind of some interesting like high-low literary kind of blending, you know, genre with more traditional literary fiction,
which we're all
so
about.
Seemed like a natural fit. I floated this idea to you. You said yes, and I went back over. You asked like how many books are there, and I pulled up the list, and I was like, so we got these ones, and then I Telegraph Avenue, and the next one we're going to do, Moonglow, I really knew nothing about. And I read a like 1 paragraph description of Telegraph Avenue, and I almost like messaged you immediately on Discord, and I was like, I've made a terrible mistake. Abort. Because this novel sounded like the most insufferable boomer brain nonsense that I could wrap my head around. Is Michael Chabon, is he a boomer or is he Gen X?
I want to say he's Gen X, but I don't have the years down exactly.
1 second. This is important, actually, I think. Okay, 1963. All right, he is just barely a boomer.
Oh, okay.
Baby boom ends in 1964.
Okay.
So I guess we could call him like a Gen X baby boomer cusp.
Always a fascinating case, the cusps.
I'm sure someone somewhere has written a good novel about a record store. I haven't read it yet.
Neither have I.
I don't really think that that's a super solid framework to build a novel on. I'm sure it's doable. Anything is possible through God. But Michael Chabon does not accomplish that here. I think it's actually kind of funny how there are like a couple bits where the record store is important, but there's not as much of it as you would think from sort of what the book is sold as.
Right. And I think the fact that it started as a 90-minute TNT pilot, where Chabon has gone on the record and said this was not a good idea for a novel because a 90-minute TNT pilot is supposed to open a bunch of doors. And Chabon realized that he couldn't open a bunch of doors for a novel. And so he had to spend 2 years rewriting this into a novel. And I think like that idea is interesting to me because, you know, it's 2010. The Wire has just ended, and The Wire was sort of like a seismic event for the liberal imagination, we might say. And I think Chabon was thinking, I could probably do The Wire. Because and one way to talk about that is because, like, for instance, Chabon has gone on the record for loving Richard Price and George Pelecanos, who are two crime writers that really heavily inspired The Wire. And I think Chabon was also thinking, I could probably riff on that. So like all of the ingredients are there. But I think, John, the idea that this started, like you were saying, as an idea of like two record store owners doesn't seem like the best idea for a novel. For a couple of reasons, but I think like what we're witnessing is the attempt to sort of like merge The Wire with Michael Chabon's middlebrow approach, with crime writing, with Middlemarch, as well as with like genre stuff that Chabon likes. And I think it comes off as like sort of a mess, honestly.
Yeah, well, I think there's another really crucial thing that I actually don't think we've broached yet, and that is that. Okay, Ben, I'm going to ask you a question. Aside from Amram from Gentleman of the Road, who is an exception here because he's existing in like a very different historical context to most Michael Chabon characters, can you name one Black character Michael Chabon wrote before this book?
I can't.
Listeners, this is the book where Michael Chabon decided that he needed to tackle race in America. And let me put it this way. I don't think this book is racist, but it also tackles these issues in the most cloying, corny way possible, up to the point where there is a literal cameo by Barack Hussein. A lot of people forget the Hussein, but I still think it's important. Obama.
Yeah. Barack Obama shows up and he's just like, let me be clear, this band is funky. and then he tells like another character that she probably shouldn't break up with her husband. And that's pretty much it. Oh no, wait. He says, I really let me be clear. I really like that you're doing what you love. And that's like very important for one of the characters.
Yeah. That scene, I can't think of another thing I've read recently where I wanted to throw a book across a room, like after finishing a scene. Like that felt so deeply, again, corny. Honestly, like kind of disrespectful almost. Like,
well, and like I think too, like, you know, we've talked about how he's done, like Dali has showed up and Orson Welles has showed up, and so in some sense it makes sense that Barack Obama would show up, but when he shows up, it's like there's something about the way Chabon writes these characters where they feel more like collections of like tics or impressions than they feel like real characters, and so like you're kind of left just like staring at these impressions of people, and as John was saying, not exactly racist, but there's something kind of like reducing about them. It's like they're just like a series of gestures, and like, you know, Barack Obama, one of the easiest people to do an impression of. It kind of makes sense that Barack Obama's in there, but it's very cloying. And John, I think you told me like off, you know, before that it was sort of like a glaze job, right? So
well, okay, let me. So Ben, I like what you said there about like the way that some of these characters in this book, I don't know if I necessarily think that this is a pattern through all of his writing, but this book in particular, it's neurosis as a stand-in for character. These characters do not have traits, they have neuroses. You know, there's one character, he's a big fat guy who can't stop eating or cheating on his wife. There's another guy.
And in some senses, John, the two are combined, where he can cheat on his wife at the Ethiopian restaurant. Ha cha cha. It's like, yeah.
And
anyway.
I think that part of what makes the Obama cameo feel so weird is that we spend all this book really like flipping between these perspectives of these different like neurotic characters. And Obama walks in and he is the only non-neurotic person in the world.
Yeah, and he's like listening to the band. He's just like, oh, let me be clear, I have no neuroses. So, like
he is the only like non-lacking subject in the entire world, and you know, this book just felt like, this book took me back to like the Obama years in a way that like I wasn't like, I kind of knew that was like what was going to happen, but like I didn't quite expect where it took me, if that makes sense.
Well, and like, because I feel like too, like if you're rewinding, okay, so we should say it's set in 2004, and so it's Obama before he runs for office, and it is written in 2011 and comes out in 2012. So like as you were saying, John, it's squarely in the middle of Obama's second term, i.e. the term where like nobody really
second term.
Or the beginning of the second term, yeah. And so it's like nobody really had to worry about anything. It's like Obama had won a second term. We could all forget about politics for a while. So I think it's almost like in 2011, Obama is the, like, of course he's not the neurotic character, but like, because it's like nobody was thinking about politics like that. Or I mean, people were, but like the general consensus. And so then Obama with no neuroses strolls in and it's just like, just do what you love. And like that's like this like, you know, very like important message and yeah, in a sea of people who are all very neurotic.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like something this book did for me was actually like remind me of what the Obama years really felt like, because it's this weird thing now where we've been in, I guess what you would say like is the Trump era since like 2016, we'll just say. And there's kind of this weird thing where I think that your perception of like, yeah, what the Obama era symbolized for a lot of people, especially people like Michael Chabon, was kind of this sense that like things are smooth sailing. Like we're getting back on track. The economy's going to pick up soon and everything's going to be great once we, you know, do something. I don't know what anybody thought they needed to happen, but like, yeah, Obama's got it under control. And there's kind of this thing where the Trump era has been kind of projected back into the Obama era now, where everyone now is like overanalyzed those 8 years and like tried to like diagnose every like strategic or like effective flaw in Obama himself as a person or in his government that led to Trump. And I'm not even saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but it is definitely strange to be reminded that, yeah, people really did think that everything was gonna be fine.
Yeah.
And yeah, when you get to the end of this novel and it's just like, and then everyone became a small business owner and lived happily ever after with their nuclear families.
Well, and I also want to talk about how one of the projects for this book, like Chabon wanted to talk about like racial harmony, and he wrote a piece that is fascinating for its Obama era hinge pointism, where Chabon both issues a soft cancellation of himself as well as justifying that he needs to write this book to enact racial utopia. And I don't want to get into the entire details of the article. It's worth looking up. But like Chabon's drawing from like an experience like living in a mixed race community that was designed to be that way. He grew up having a lot of black friends. And this is clearly something that like is important to him. But the piece, his justification, at least to the public for writing this book, was that when the OJ trial happened, he was surprised that black people were happy about OJ getting off. And he says in the piece, I was racist and I need to do better. And so as a result, he's going to write this book that's going to present a picture of racial harmony like he experienced growing up, which I think is interesting for its both like issue of Me Too era, like looking ahead, as well as the sort of like, I could do this as an author. I could tackle this social issue, which I think people are a little less reticent to do now, or more reticent. But anyway, so he basically presents, he's like, what does it actually look like in the book? And I feel like in the book, it's just kind of like getting to eat fusion cuisine. It's sort of like racial harmony, like the idea that we're both combining our traditions together to produce something, as well as like it's all consumption based. And like, sure, there are disagreements and people work through their disagreements, which I think is good. But I kept wondering what the picture of racial harmony is in this book. And it just comes down to like getting to eat fusion food, which like is good. And I agree. But I feel like there should be like more to it than that, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I agree, because there is this uneasiness through the book of particularly how the white Jewish characters are relating to their black friends and neighbors.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is probably Chabon drawing on like his own experiences. I think admiring black culture, growing up, having black friends, wanting to like fit in with this thing that you're being told is cool, feeling some kind of ownership over some of these things because you know, for instance, with you know, music or you know, blaxploitation movies, you know, having these deep like artistic resonations with these things and thinking that that gives you some kind of insight into black culture, or into black people, and I feel like a big key here is sort of the setting itself, which is Telegraph Avenue, which I think runs between Berkeley and Oakland. And, you know, so that's the Bay Area. You know, this book, what I found myself thinking about was like, this is the Bay Area pre tech boom.
Yeah.
You know, now, like literally, if every character in this novel is not wiped out in the '08 crash, they are getting booted out of their community like 10 years later, when like Facebook bulldozes the record store to put up a playpen for Stanford graduates.
And that's what's so interesting, because one of the intended ironies is that that's supposed to happen. And so, like, you know, one of the plot points is that like a big Walmart is going to come in, but it's a Walmart solely for Black Americans. But it's supposed to come in and we're supposed to read this and go like, oh, in 2011, 2012, we know that Walmart folds because of the recession. But also, like, yeah, there's no kind of hint that something else is going to happen. And I felt like that irony was also lost on me, because I had to like go, oh, that's right. Like, it's probably not going to succeed because of the recession. And I was just like, I don't know if this is like working the way he's intending it to work now, at least. It might have worked in 2012. But yeah, I agree. It's like the tech wave is going to come in and undo whatever, like temporary progress has been made.
Well, I think that it gets down to like a deeper like inconsistency here, which, like you said, this is Chabon's like idea of utopia. Like there does not appear to be like a deeper issue at hand here than just kind of really like a surface level racism in a lot of ways. Like the book does make some reference to you know, structural issues facing African Americans, but most of the African American characters in this book are upwardly mobile. They're, you know, petty bourgeois, educated. We don't really see a lot of people who are like poor. And it is kind of, again, it feels like it's this Obama era thing where it's like, oh, we're going to find a way to bridge the racial divide by fully extending meritocracy to the right sorts of people, and everything else is going to flow out from that. And again, that's at some level, like, it feels very Obama era, but it also does, again, just feel very weird in the light of the fact that the economic crisis had only happened like 3 years before this book comes out. And this book, like you said, there is like kind of a weird irony at the end where you kind of know that this is slated to happen, but there's also this element where Chabon wants it to feel like a happy ending. And wants it to be this thing where we know Obama is going to be president, and so everything is actually still going to be fine.
Yeah, and I also found, like, I know we're kind of jumping all over. Well, maybe I'll save this thing if we want to talk plot, but I found that, like, there's a sort of troubling aspect to his description of the birth that happens toward the end of the book, where the birth is like passing on like neuroses and in a continual line from parent to child. And I found that to be kind of troubling. Like, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with it, but it's like, yeah, since I'm not going to talk about structural issues, it's like all of the sort of trials and tribulations of life happen because of birthing, which is also kind of concerning, because we're not going to really tackle structural issues. And this is where I think it's interesting to talk just briefly about like the crime writers that Chabon is talking about. Like, Richard Price wrote Clockers, which inspired The Wire, and I'm not as familiar with George Pelecanos, but like in those, it's some real like 90s, like what happened to us in terms of like the economy and like 90s crime and like the war on drugs. And so there's some like deep-seated political issues there that I feel like, while Chabon may be thinking like he's going to do something similar, they don't really make their way into this book. And also, just taking Clockers as an example, like Richard Price spent years researching some of the details about drug dealing in that book. And to me, like, it's like the way Chabon describes it in a piece for the LA Review of Books is that like the black characters in Clockers are Richard Price characters that happen to be black, not black characters in a Richard Price novel, which I think is an interesting distinction, because I feel like, as you were kind of saying, John, these are like Chabon characters that happen to be black, but they're also only all neurotic. And I feel like there's not like enough developed interiority, so they end up becoming like impressions. And I feel like at least in Clockers, it doesn't feel like Richard Price is doing an impression, and he's also got all of this detail that it's almost impossible. It's almost like reporting as opposed to like something more like fictional. So I don't know, I think like Chabon's sort of interweaving of influences here, I think, tends to like bleed into each other in a way that ends up like showing the political values of the era rather than being like a self-contained work or something like that.
See, that's interesting you say that, Ben. I don't totally disagree with you, but I also feel like there's almost this element where I think because he's trying so hard to do like justice to the black characters in a certain way, all the non-black characters end up feeling like way more like, yeah, shallowly sketched in comparison. Yeah. Which, I mean, could be a legitimate artistic choice, but it kind of feels like this thing where, because Chabon isn't black, doesn't actually know the black experience, the only way he knows to kind of like fake it is to make his white characters like way more shallow and kind of one note by comparison.
Yeah, I can totally buy that. And I think that, like, you know, we just read Rise of the Novel. I feel like that's the Fielding approach. Like, he's mixing Fielding and Richardson, but like he ends up producing characters to type so that he can say something else. So
yeah, well, that's actually a good segue to something that I think we originally determined we were going to try to talk about earlier, but kind of we got a little sidetracked. So there's something kind of funny that happened with this episode, where a year to the day today, basically, Ben, you and I were reading Middlemarch. Remember Middlemarch?
Oh, so great.
Salad Days. Before Telegraph Avenue. Back when we were still in the unbroken streak of good books.
Yeah.
But Michael Chabon has said that like this is basically his attempt to do like a Middlemarch of the Obama years. I'll give Telegraph Avenue this. It's shorter than Middlemarch, which is good because it's not as good a novel.
The one thing I'll say about it is that it's shorter than Middlemarch, which is good. And then it's just,
Oh man, if this was a Manhattan cocktail party in like 2013, that would have killed.
Yeah, you would have killed John. Everyone would be doubled over laughing, and you'd just be holding your martini and like holding for the pose at the end of the joke. Like,
so there's part of me that obviously like my knee-jerk reaction is that this is really nothing like Middlemarch. That Michael Chabon did not accomplish his goal here, but I don't know if that is 100% fair, if it's just that I'm very defensive of Middlemarch because like politicians and ugly buildings, everything old becomes beautiful eventually. And so I don't know if I don't know if maybe like the problems I see in this book, maybe someone reading Middlemarch at the time it was written would see similar problems in the way it depicts the past.
Yeah.
Or in the, depicting the social issues of the past to try to say something about the present. But that being said, Middlemarch, I feel like is almost like, for me, it's like almost this platonic ideal of like what the realist novel can be.
Yeah.
And it feels like a real place. Like I finished that book and like I felt like I knew the village of Middlemarch. I felt like I knew the people who inhabited it. It did a great job like grounding you in that world and that community in a way that like this book doesn't, despite I think trying to do something similar in terms of grounding us in a location and giving us like a core group of people that we kind of follow and, go from one viewpoint to another one and seeing kind of different angles of this community through different people's eyes. And frankly, I think that this is the first time where Chabon's, like what has worked for Chabon in the past and what I think we generally like about him ends up working against him. Because his desire to indulge in like these twists, these little so I'm looking for these little like detours into like genre land end up making this book feel cartoonish.
Yeah.
There is an extended subplot about one of the characters' fathers who is Michael Chabon subplot about a guy and his dad. Whoa, stop the presses. But the father is a former blaxploitation movie star who abandoned him. We later find out he got involved with drugs. But he comes back to town at the beginning and he's kind of cleaned up his act. But
trying to reconnect,
we do a detour into like his past at the beginning to the point where I kind of got confused at first. And I thought maybe the book was taking place in the 70s for a little bit.
Yeah, that 70s flashback was very sudden and not set up, I feel like.
And so we kind of like flash back to this guy. I mean, he's not doing like literal blaxploitation stuff, but we get to like watch this like crime thing starring a guy who is like a blaxploitation movie star. And
his friend also is kind of presented as like a Clint Eastwood, like fedora wearing, like laconic cowboy who speaks very eloquently, and like they're writing, together to go like do a hit, basically.
Yeah.
And it's like very, very Pulp Fiction Tarantino.
And it just like it brings everything into like this heightened place where these characters end up not feeling real. They feel like types. They feel like, again, they feel like bundles of neuroses or types rather than fully fleshed out people, the way that Middlemarch at its best like felt like reading about real people. And I understand like what he's trying to do here. He's trying to like pay homage to these things from Black culture that mean a lot to him. And as someone who likes a lot of that kind of blaxploitation, Black kung fu cinema kind of stuff, as someone who likes funk music and jazz and all these things that Michael Chabon clearly seems to love, I understand like why he's choosing to do it and pay homage that way. But because the book already feels like it's primarily grappling with Blackness as like a consumer good, it makes it feel cheap and cartoonish rather than deeply lived in and experienced the way that I really think Middlemarch felt.
Yeah. Well, and that's also a problem with The Wire. Like, there are several characters on The Wire, like Omar, and there's another guy that shows up that's basically just like James Bond, essentially. And those are types, like, and they're almost like genre. And to me, like, I always disliked those because like The Wire is ostensibly trying to be like a social realist novel, but about Baltimore. And it ends up like throwing in all this genre stuff because like, why not? But as you were, describing eloquently, John, I feel like it sort of throws the intended purpose of the thing out of whack, as if it's like worried you're going to get bored. So it needs to throw in something like pulpy and genre-y to keep your attention. But like, I think I remember us saying, John, on the Middlemarch episode that we didn't like some of the like more Dickensian characters, but like there are not that many of them in Middlemarch. They're mostly all like as tried to present it as in 3D in their social milieu as possible, without spending too much time in their headspace because there's other stuff going on. And I feel like I don't like the like, I'm not going to get bored if you're doing it well. Like, you don't have to throw in the genre stuff like in what is ostensibly a social realist project.
Yeah. Do we want
to talk plot or characters?
Well, I mean, there's not a lot of plot exactly.
There isn't really,
which is fine. I don't think that every book needs to have plot, but I feel like this is, while we've been critical of like how he builds up these characters, like this is a project that's designed to be like about characters more than it's about like a standard plot. So I feel like talking about characters is probably the way to go. So we start with our ostensible protagonists, though I don't think we actually spend that much time with one of them. And that's Nat and Archie. Nat is a white Jewish guy, and Archie he's the big fat black guy. And
he's the son of the as we said, the blaxploitation star.
Yes. And they are the co-owners of Brokeland Records, which at the start of the story is kind of a local institution. People, they have their regular customers. They come in, they shoot the shit. Very few people buy records there, but it's a community hangout. So Nat bugged me through this whole book because he's ostensibly, like I said, he's kind of positive they're going to be like a deuterotagonist, but we spend like almost zero time in his head. We learned that he had a black stepmom,
Yeah.
And he learned how to like fry chicken from her. And like that is a big part of why he has like a lot of affection for Black culture and like thinks of himself as kind of part of the community.
But he also strenuously does not talk Black.
Yeah.
And he hates any person who is not Black. Yeah. He's very against that.
He finds it like deeply like offensive and annoying. Archie, like I said, big fat guy, can't stop cheating on his wife, no impulse control.
He also buys a lot of records. There's a sort of sort of twinning of like having a record buying habit, as a lot of people say.
Yeah. So again, these two are ostensible main protagonists. I definitely feel like we get to know Archie better. Turns out their wives are also friends. Nat's wife, Aviva, is somewhat standard Chabon wife character, except unlike most of his wife characters, she is like rail thin and like an A cup, but she's still a redhead.
I missed that detail, but that checks out. I missed that she was a redhead somehow, but that's so funny. He's like, I'm gonna mix it up a little bit. Maybe she's a smaller redhead.
Again, not a very like well sketched character. She's kind of this stereotype of an upper, like well-educated, like Jewish liberal woman. She runs a midwife business with Archie's wife, Gwen, who I think is probably the character we spend the most time with, apart from...
And in the headspace of...
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that if this book actually has a protagonist, it's her.
Yes. Yeah.
She is, again, kind of a fairly well-educated Black woman. She is pregnant with her and Archie's first child at the start of the book. She is a nurse in addition to being a midwife. And the plot of this book, insofar as it has a plot, really ties into her relationship with her husband and her relationship with her career, more or less. Mm-hmm. At the beginning of the book, they're like help assisting with a home birth. It goes wrong. They take the woman to the hospital. The doctor on staff at the hospital makes some flippant, racially charged remarks towards Gwen. She gets angry at him, and there is conflict between her and the power system of this hospital about whether or not they're going to be able to maintain their privileges to work with the hospital as midwives.
And Aviva says basically like, you should just apologize. And then Gwen's like, no, like he said the things, I don't need to do that.
Yes. And then kind of our last kind of main set of characters, we have Julius or Julie Jaffe, who is Nat and Aviva's son, and probably the Michael Chabon self-insert.
I mean, he likes prog rock, and during this time, Chabon was like, I love prog rock. Like, you can find articles that were published in 2012 about how great prog rock is, and you know what? I agree with him. Prog rock's great. So,
crucially, he's also a gay nerd.
right. That's yeah. So we're hitting all of Chabon's categories. Hot red wife lady, being gay, being a nerd. Yeah, like that's all the Chabon stuff.
Yes.
So,
but Julie is paired with Titus, who somewhat confusingly is Archie's long lost son from a previous relationship, whose mother has passed away, and he has moved back to the Bay Area. But Archie does not know this is happening until later, and he just kind of ends up latching onto Julie, who ends up falling in love with him. Titus is an odd character because I don't really think we ever get into his head at all.
We don't. We know he likes directors, but it's mostly through buff. Like what he says.
Yeah. He feels like a character where, again, maybe because he's interacted most directly with the Michael Chabon self-insert character. Michael Chabon doesn't feel comfortable like getting in his head in the same way. Yeah.
But I like, though, like you were saying, like Chabon in constructing the book this way is kind of playing to his strengths because it's character duos, and the character duos cover all of the themes that he likes to write about.
Yes.
So I think construction wise, this plays to his strengths. And I think I think we're equipped to see that, being that we've read him, all the way. We've been with him through this whole point. But there's something about it where it ends up being kind of like limiting too, where I feel like we're never quite away from that, except for the parrot chapter, which we could talk about. But it's just, there's something about like this spindle turning where it's like always these relationships and those relationships, and it's like, I don't know, it felt very, I don't know. Chabon was clearly shooting for something, content wise, that he was writing outside of his zone, but he was also playing to his strengths at the same time. And so it for some reason ends up feeling like split to me somehow. But
well, for me, it felt like I found myself at certain points in this book feeling kind of like claustrophobic almost, where really we're only ever with these 6 characters. Middlemarch, again, there were characters that were more and less important, but crucially, like, there were characters whose stories didn't intersect with each other all the time. There was, it's this huge sprawling book, but it's kind of this thing where when you only have these 6 characters, everything one of them does affects all the other ones, and you just never get a chance to breathe and let something like sit. There's no point, like, it's not even in this way where it's not so much that like, oh, it feels like a bunch of dominoes falling on top of you or something like that, but nothing ever. Yeah, there's no chance to like let something breathe for a minute by detouring to a unrelated viewpoint. We're just constantly at the same clip because everything that happens echoes through like every other character's story like almost immediately.
Well, except for the parrot chapter, but I didn't really like that. Like, so I keep saying this. So the parrot chapter, it's interesting seeing Chabon pull out the parrot again, because as we talked about in last Final Solution, they're like, oh, we weren't expecting that chapter from the parrot's perspective. And in this book, we get that. But all it really serves is just like as a crane shot that just checks in on all of the characters. And I feel like we're not even really getting to sit with any of them. It's just like this sort of like plate twirling thing that like, I thought it was interesting that it was in there, but I feel like it wasn't really taking that much risks. And there were interviews that like there were reviews of this book like on Bad Reads that complained about this chapter, and to me it's not really so much complaint worthy as just like he didn't really like take any risks with writing a 7-page long sentence from the perspective of a parrot. It just felt like a crane shot. Like it was like, then they're doing this, then they're doing that, now it's over. So yeah I found myself thinking about that chapter a bit because I've been trying to like puzzle out like what's with the parrots. Like this is well, so I have a theory, John, if you want to hear my theory. Absolutely, because I don't know if there is one in Moonglow, so this might be our last chance to talk about the parrots. So it's kind of a little too cute, but I think the parrot shows up in Final Solution. A Mina, a talking bird, shows up at the beginning of Gentlemen of the Road, and a parrot shows up in this. And I think it's not a coincidence. I think the only one that doesn't apply to this is Final, or as a Yiddish Policeman's Union, but a parrot usually shows up when he's doing a genre impression because he's parroting the things he likes. And I think, and I honestly, well, and I know he never said that, and it's a little too cute, but I think like, where does the parrot show up? It's in Final Solution, it's in Gentlemen of the Road, and it's in this one where in an interview he's like, yeah, I wrote this sentence because I looked at other people that write really long sentences and I said I could do that. So he's parroting stuff, and again, like, that's, you hated that pun, John, so it's a little too cute, but I have no other explanation for other than just like, I'm doing an impression of what I like. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know, I think there might be something there, because it's this thing where it's clearly it's too deliberate at this point. This isn't just like a thing that he's like subconsciously slipping into these stories.
Yeah.
Like, this is a deliberate choice he's making to have a parrot show up over and over again in these books, particularly again, like a talking parrot. And I mean, I think that there's something there in terms of like the way he uses it to like play with perspective. Because even again, like you said, even though in this book it's mostly doing like a crane shot, that is like a little different stylistically than what he's doing throughout the rest of the book. But yeah, that feels like it is like that is too cute, but also, Michael Chabon clearly thinks he's a very clever boy.
Well, and I just like the parroting thing. Like, he's never said that, but I'm like, he's parroting. He's impressive. He's doing an impression of something. And sure, it's like, you know, it's got that manic invention that I associate with New Sincerity. It's a little too like everything has to be overly described and just so like the bird's name is 58, which I missed the references to what that's referring to. So I'll have to think about that. But like Pieces of 8, 58, like the bird in Treasure Island, but because the bird always goes pieces of 8, which the best version of that is there's a Terry Pratchett book where this like lawyer who is dressed as a pirate has a bird that says 12.5%, which I think is just like a very funny joke for a lawyer version of that. Anyway, yeah, I feel like I can't really describe it in any other way as just he's doing an impression of genre, and I think like it shows up in the crane shot, but like, there's less of a genre impression in this book, except for blaxploitation stuff, and we really don't get a lot of that either. That's the other thing I kind of miss. I'm like, I feel like when Chabon's writing genre, he's at his best. Like, that's the stuff that I enjoy reading a lot. Like, I like Wonder Boys because I think the protagonist is actually repellent, but I didn't really think there's that much of a repellent protagonist in, like, Archie is just, he's just cheating and eating and buying records, and it's just like, I don't know.
Well, and like, the thing is that I feel like Wonder Boys, Chabon, we talked about this, you know, it feels like that character is the protagonist in that book is like a projection of his own like self-loathing and like where he thinks he's going to like end up in like, you know, 20 years or something. Whereas like Archie, even though he has like a lot of the same foibles that I can't remember the main character of Wonder Boy's name, but
Grady Tripp.
Yeah, Grady Tripp. Even though they have like a lot of the same foibles, it feels like Archie's reasons for them are both more like they feel less they feel like too pat, like it's like, oh, his dad left, you know, he never had a mom, so he comforts himself by eating and, you know, sleeping with all these random women, but it also feels like Chabon's giving him like way more of a pass than he gave Grady Tripp.
Yeah.
Maybe because again, like I don't know how much of that is like Chabon's like evolving perspective, because there is like a significant amount of time in between Wonder Boys and this novel.
Well,
it might be
and this is the last one.
More compassion for like these things he used to see as like being really really noxious. It might also be that he's like pulling punches because he doesn't want to like make a black character who's just totally irredeemable or repellent in some way. Yeah.
I think that adds up. And I mean, there was like a 5-year gap between this and the last book. So I think like Chabon had been kind of just living his life kind of, and I'm sure he was doing other stuff, but like I could see like sort of that more of that perspective come into this book, like in terms of giving people backstories. But it's very like cyclical. Like his dad was bad and he's a bad dad to Titus, and the cyclical nature of like families and the birthing and like the pain that the parents bestow on children. Like that's, I would say, like a sub theme of this book that doesn't exactly connect with the sort of stated political intention. Because it's not like characters are saying like, you know, it's always been difficult with racial harmony in the past. It's just like, no, we're doing like racial harmony now, kind of like, and then like there's like, yeah, there's like this sort of cyclical nature of like familial trauma, which like I don't know, like I'm not sure again how that like jives with the other thing. Like I just feel like there's all these like seams running throughout this book, like the construction, the characters, the themes, like. And like, I can understand why they're in there, but they don't seem to connect for me. And like, just as a brief digression, it's very interesting that he made everybody in the record store love soul jazz and jazz funk. And this is important because he said in a Rolling Stone article, I wasn't interested in them being jazz heads. It wasn't fun for them to just like jazz. They had to like something else. And so then he describes this process by which he realizes that like there was an attempt to make a jazz commercial, which started in 1970, but like really peaked in the late 70s. And that was when jazz started incorporating like backbeat funk stuff, soul, like other influences into the jazz. And then at some point by the 80s, it just turns into smooth jazz. But like that period of like good instruments, great players, well-produced albums, then also gets sampled a lot for the 90s and for hip hop. And so for Chabon in the Stone article, he goes and he has his character say this is perfect. Racial harmony, genre harmony, musical harmony. Everyone's going to love jazz funk. But also like that stuff is like, I don't know. It's all like I have some records that he talks about because you could buy them really cheap. I'm sure they're now expensive now. But I just like, if I walked in and everyone was like talking about soul jazz, I'd be like, what's going on exactly? Like, and like when the characters talk about jazz, they're very dismissive. When nobody seems to talk about rap or hip hop.
Yeah, and it just really stuck out to me.
And like I could see Chabon being like, I don't know about that, and I don't want to pretend. So in some ways, it's like a smart play, but at the same time, it's like it's like, oh, like you can tell something is missing. Like it's like obvious. I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely, because it's this thing where you get the impression, like, again, this record store is both supposed to be like this community, like hangout, but like no one who like seriously listens to music in 2004 would not at least like know something about hip hop, or like would have
like Lil Wayne
like coming in to like buy hip hop records.
Yeah.
Especially again, if you were in like a predominantly black neighborhood, like trying to sell to black people, unless you are literally only trying to sell to like 2004 era unks.
which there are a lot of those actually in this book. 2004 era unks, like just trying to buy like, you know, what is it? Jimmy Smith Live in Israel, which is a record I had to look up, and it does exist. So, but or like, but yeah, they'd be listening to Lil Wayne or something, and like and again, he has people mention it offhandedly, so he knows that like that's part of it. But like in playing to his strengths and making them into soul jazz, it felt like too specialized almost. Even if I could see why it's in there.
Well, I think that again, it gets down to like this more fundamental issue I have with the book, which is, again, I'm not saying Michael Chabon is like racist, but he is approaching this, I feel, from kind of the standpoint like he wants to he wants to write a book about race. Okay, fine. You're a liberal American novelist. Like, whether or not it's a good idea, you're not the first person to try, and you're not going to be the last.
Yeah.
But so much of his experience of, I guess, like Black culture feels like it comes out of a particular time and place that he was alive. I'm not saying he like has Michael Chabon and has no Black friends now. I'm sure he probably still does, but he clearly like has so much affection for a very particular period of Black culture, and that's basically the 70s. And he does not feel the same level of connection to like contemporary for the time Black culture. And I feel like I almost would rather, and this might be a terrible idea, an absolutely garbage dog shit idea that would have been awful and no one would have liked it except maybe me. But I almost wish that he had just written a novel that was a blaxploitation movie.
Yeah,
because I really like the character of Luther, despite him being kind of cartoonish and feeling like he doesn't quite jive with the rest of the reality of the novel.
And Luther's friend Chan Flowers is also a great character, and he's also like kind of like tropey.
Yeah, well, like I know he said like the kind of crime aside at the beginning of the book where we flash back to the 70s and this hit. Like felt like it kind of came out of nowhere, but it's also some of the best like writing in the book, I think. Like it was one of my favorite parts just to read on like a sentence by sentence level. And I feel like there's kind of this thing where he like I get the impression that maybe this wasn't quite the book he wanted to write, but the book he wanted to write did not feel like he was allowed to write, more or less. Because he's a committed lib. He doesn't want to overstep his boundaries and do something that could potentially be problematic in this way. And I mean, again, like I said, it could be for the best that he did not do that. It probably is for the best that he did not do that. But there's a tension here between the Black culture that he really seems to like and appreciate, and Black culture as it feels like it actually existed in the 2000s, insofar as I can say anything about that.
Right, and that goes double for me, insofar as I can say anything about that. And like, but like he has like Nat say like there was no good music after 1980. And like just kind of like, and like they make fun of like Sun Ra at one point, and like I don't know, I felt like as somebody who tries to listen to a lot of stuff, it felt like I was getting this like sort of blinkered view on it. And I feel like the soul jazz stuff, like nobody is sampling it, even though characters talk about sampling it. Like it would be interesting if there was like a character who was like making beats and was like there, like rifling through the record bins, like trying to find good drum samples. And then one of the record store owners is like, oh, it's a pretty good album. And he's just like, I'm just going to take the drums off of this. Like, cause like that would have been like an interesting interaction as opposed to kind of like getting these like, like reverential takes on this stuff that like feel like it doesn't fit, or like, I also feel like a lot of the big emotional moments feel like TV show moments. Like, so one of the jazz musicians who is in the store all the time dies because his Hammond organ falls on top of him. And they have his funeral in the store. One, move from the wire. Characters have funerals for the wires in Irish bars all the time. Two, they play a cover of the Hammond B3 organ of a song, a Carole King song written by a white lady, on the Hammond B3 organ. And it basically goes into everyone's head at once, and it's like complicated and contradictory. And I'm like, this is almost the way every 90s prestige show or early 2000s rather ended their season 1 arc, is by playing an ambiguous song drop and checking in with all of the characters. And when I saw that, I literally started levitating reading the book. I'm like, this should have just been a TV show. Like I feel like it would have fixed all of the problems, and instead it wasn't. So, but.
Well, I'm thinking of kind of back to the beginning of the conversation and about again, the place Obama plays in this book, and the sort of the conversation we've just been having about kind of the way music is utilized in this book. And it feels like, I think, a very central part of the tension here is that Michael Chabon, I think he's even kind of aware of this, because there are several references like Quentin Tarantino as like an insecure white guy who latches onto black culture to feel cool.
Many such references, John. And I remember I texted to you, this feels very Tarantino. And then I got to a bit where a character watches movies, the Tarantino references in Kill Bill, and a nerdy grad school parody explains them. And he like pushes up his glasses. He's like, Lady Snowblood is used this way in like Kill Bill. And again, I started going like, so I was reading the book. Like, oh my God.
The syllabus for that class did look great, though.
Yeah.
They give us like a
right.
They give us like a list of the films they have to watch for this Kill Bill class, and they're all bangers.
Well, again, like Tarantino knows what he's doing, and also like doing a meta Tarantino joke is very meta Tarantino. And suddenly, I feel like my brain is coming out of my ears. Like it's just like I don't know. Yeah, it's okay, sorry. It's very Tarantino. I interrupted you.
No,
yeah,
you're fine. But I feel like there is a tension in this book between the fact that I think Michael Chabon is not stupid. He's kind of corny, but he's not dumb.
Yeah, he knows what he's doing most of the time.
But there is a fundamental tension in this book between the fact that he knows that he is a white Jewish guy who is latched on to specific parts of black culture because they make him feel cool and sophisticated. And I think that he knows he's doing that, but he's also doing it. And the self-awareness can only kind of carry you so far.
This actually is a good point. I'm glad you brought this up, because I feel like this is like at least if we check in with David Foster Wallace, that's his whole thing. And it almost becomes impossible after a while. A lot of David Foster Wallace's stuff, also considered to be new sincerity or hysterical realism, is constantly like checking in and being reflexive about literally everything. There's one story called Good Old Neon where a guy's like, I can't not be inauthentic, because if I'm trying to be authentic, I'm being inauthentic. And it's this incredibly tragic story where he ends up committing suicide because he can't do it. And like that kind of like mental like lock, like Chabon is a lot more well adjusted because it's not like that drilled down as it is in David Foster Wallace. I think that's something that's like at play with this sort of like style of writing where it's like metafictional and the author is aware of what they're doing, but they can't like not do it. Like it feels like a trap or something. I don't know. Well, I just think that's a good point though, because it checks in with like other stuff in that.
But I think that there's also an element where I think this brings me back to Obama, where again, it's this certain image of blackness. Again, Obama was, again, we were there at the time. Obama was, he was black, but he was to a certain type of like sophisticated white liberal, like part of what made Obama so like cool and so beloved, like to this day as a figure, is that he was a very particular kind of black person, or at least that is how he was received by these type of white people. He, I think, was read as kind of maybe not hearkening back to, but like being in a conversation with this kind of cool 70s blackness. I think for a lot of people like Chabon's age, before all those hip hop style blacks like started going around and messed everything up, because that is absolutely like a thing in like white, not even white liberal, like white culture, where it's like, oh man, like all the black people in the 70s were so cool and like they dressed so cool and funk was such cool music. Why did they have to like all turn into like hip hop style thugs in the 90s? And again, Chabon isn't doing that directly, but it definitely feels like this book is in that vein. Like
Yeah, and like, and if I go back to Clockers, it's like Clockers is so rooted in its social milieu that like there's no time for that. It's like this character is doing this because that's how they're trying to survive, and we don't have this sort of like shuttling between styles. It's like, you're here, this is what the way the world works, I'm going to try to present it a certain way, as opposed to kind of like drawing on this reference pool. And like you had said that, John, I think I found a Chabon interview where he just says like the 70s is when we figured out a lot of stuff about masculinity, and I was like, I guess what? For some people, what? Yeah, he was. That's what he said in the interview. It means like, again, like you were saying, there's like a decade we're comfortable with, and then there's other stuff that we're not, like. But and so I guess the 70s is when you could wear a duster and walk in, and they would play the like do 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 do, and then they're like, and you just be like, yeah, I'm the cowboy of this area. Like,
but I think that, so kind of to just put like a little more of a point on what on this, I think that it's really interesting to me. There are very few sections in this book where a Black person reacts negatively to a white character and is both not totally justified in doing so, but also it eventually like comes out that it's fine. So like, yeah, the doctor who is like, frankly, like, it feels like Chabon kind of wants you to be like, oh, this guy was tired, he didn't mean to be racist.
Yes. Yeah.
The doctor who's racist to Gwen ends up being the one who delivers her baby. And
right.
It's just this thing where there are no Black characters in this book who are kind of not on board with like this racial utopia thing. Like, there's no one who is, again, like poor and like has a chip on their shoulder. Like, everyone is doing their best, muddling through. And I'm not saying like you can't show people like getting along. Like, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it feels like it is ignoring like a lot of the Black experience to like give this Obama jazz funk version of Blackness that is appealing to white liberals. And again, I don't know what like the right way to do this is as a white writer. I probably wouldn't try to write this kind of book as a white writer. But there's something here that feels like it is missing. If you are going to try to write a book about race in America, and particularly like not just about race in America, but about Black-white relations in America, you have to deal with like the ugliness more.
Yeah, and like, it's muddling along. There's not a whole lot of structural issues. There aren't any like militant political characters. I don't know, that all of the like the sort of it feels like it exists in this kind of bubble, and so like you were saying in the opening, John, we get to check in on the bubble, and then the bubble doesn't pop. So like, I will say I've been a little unfair. I do think that he does, in terms of writing, he's got the dialogue down very well. Like, this is a very dialogue heavy book. There's not a whole lot of description. Like, there's not a whole lot of Chabon's like patented ekphrasis, description of fictional objects. There is a description of a song on a fictional record on the CTI label that I think is actually awesome, because it made me physically go, I want to listen to this, even though I know it's not real. And I wish there was more of that. I feel like most of the time I was going like, oh, I know what this is. I know what they're talking about. But like, I read that description of like this CTI song, and it was like, like so perfect because I listened to CTI that I was like, oh, that's good. Like, I wish that was real. And like, you can find music nerd forums where somebody has posted, they should record this song for Michael Chabon's Telegraph Avenue book. So it's like the thing worked. And I did love that. But like, there wasn't enough of that. And I think he was reining himself in so that he could manage all these characters. And so there's not like, you know, plate twirling fictional description stuff.
Yeah, I think like on a craft level, like I think that there's something interesting here because I think that like this feels like the book where he is, like you said, maybe reining himself in a little bit, but maybe not necessarily in a way that's like, I don't know. The issues I have with this book are not like craft level issues. Like, I feel like the prose is actually quite good. And I feel like he's tamed a lot of his like worst impulses here towards trying to like blow your brains out every third paragraph. With just like an extended metaphor that's so dazzling and clever that that you lose track of what's happening in the story. As
you're like, where am I?
Most of these books, like I never felt myself lost in this book in that way. But also, that's part of the charm of a lot of these books we've read so far. Even when like Cavalier and Clay, it maybe got a little bit to be too much. I don't know. I kind of found myself missing that here.
Yeah, I wonder what Nat from Collective Action Comics would have thought of this. I kept thinking that actually, because I was like, he really didn't like, you know, justifiably so, Cavalier and Clay, but I was like reading it, I'm like, man, he really wouldn't have liked this.
Nat, do not read this. You will hate it.
Yeah.
In fact, listeners, unless you're doing what we're doing and you want to be a Michael Chabon completionist for some reason, don't read Telegraph Avenue. It's not worth it.
I don't think it's worth it. And again, like you were saying, John, I think his craft is good. I liked some of the writing, but I also, there were long stretches of this book that I did not like. So
yeah, I mean, I'm going to put it this way. I think that I'm curious to see what Moonglow's like now, because I want to see, like, are we getting a redemption arc?
Well, so I'm actually kind of fascinated because somebody told me Moonglow is good, and I think Moonglow is actually written in a kind of like Thomas Bernhard, one character telling their entire life story.
Okay.
And I tend to really like that stuff, so I wonder if Chabon is sort of like, I need to go into some like old masters type stuff, like Thomas Bernhard, Sebald, you know, like the one character monologuing their lives in a kind of fictional way.
Yeah.
That sounds to me kind of like it might be a redemption story. Like he might be kind of like evolving his style in the right way. As opposed to kind of like the sort of TV plot vibe of Telegraph Avenue.
And, you know, I'll put it this way. Like, if you write 8 novels and your 7th one is the first one that is like a true stinker, most people don't ever write 7 novels, period. And most people have like a bad one way before that in their career.
Yeah, like that's kind of like an impossible run. Like that means you flipped a coin and it's come up heads, like 6 times in a row, and then the 7th time it comes on tails, I guess.
Yeah.
Like,
so I guess what I'm saying is, like, I don't feel like this book makes me think less of Chabon as a writer. I still consider myself like a fan, insofar as I have ever considered myself a fan, but it feels like this one, like he got high on his own supply, as many libs did in 2012.
Yeah, and I think that was the kind of, like, I agree, John, because like it's just so second term Obama pilled that I just like I feel like it can't quite break free of that. Well, I guess
I think there's also one thing, and I feel like we've kind of talked around this a little bit. Like you said, this book feels like TV writing a lot. I feel like part of the problem here is genuinely that This was the kind of start of the span of time where we all deluded ourselves into thinking TV was good because we had The Sopranos and The Wire come out in like quick succession. We were like, oh, TV's real art now. And so I think that Chabon, like many great artists, was like, oh, what can I learn from this newly vital genre? But it turns out TV has always been bad, and there's nothing to learn from it.
Yeah, like honestly, like I feel like I also set myself up for reading this in an interesting way because I watched all The Wire, which I had mixed feelings about, and I decided I don't think I'm going to watch TV anymore for a while after watching all of The Wire. But then I read the influences on The Wire, like the price, and I liked that so much. And then when I like sort of realized like Chabon was doing this, I had like my antenna out for stuff, and that's when I started seeing all of the like the snappy dialogue, the visual moments. Like it felt less like the stuff I like out of like interiority and social presentation, and more just like mannerisms, tropes, shticks, like that kind of stuff. And like, again, I could talk about The Wire for a while, but a lot of what I said about Telegraph Avenue is sort of how I feel about The Wire, which is like, why do you have to keep juicing us with tropes every so often to keep us interested? Like, but.
It's because TV is bad. It's because TV is bad, and it's dumb, and it's for dumb people.
Yeah, the boob tube, as they call it.
I as I get older, the more I find myself turning into the worst stereotype of the guy. Yeah, who I remember hearing about. I didn't have this person as a professor, but I heard about somebody who had a professor who literally had his TV buried in his backyard because that way, if he really needed to watch something, he could, but he really had to want to do it. And
I have to unearth my TV. Yeah,
I think that is the proper pose that the modern aesthete should take towards television.
Yeah, I'm also just like addicted to doing really bad bits whenever somebody talks to me about TV. So they'll be like, "Oh, Severance," and I'll be like, "Isn't that just Lost?" Like, and then I'll be like, "Didn't somebody get fired on Lost?" And then somebody will like explain to me like why I'm wrong, or just like, "Oh, did you see the new Shane Gillis stand up on SNL?" And I'll be like, "Shane Gillis? You mean the beer salesman?" I think I would have known if he was doing stand up. Like, and I just like doing that because I just can't be bothered sometimes to watch all these episodes of Severance and find out what's real and what's not. So
yep. Well, I don't have too much else to say about Telegraph Avenue.
Listeners, I hope you enjoyed this. I feel like this was our first kind of like we both didn't enjoy the book, and I hope we don't, just suddenly hit a streak of bad ones after this. I think it's important to sort of realize what you don't like about something and be able to talk about it in a coherent way, as opposed to just going, I didn't like this.
Well, again, Michael Chabon, he wrote a book we didn't like, but hey, we had plenty to talk about.
Yeah, which is the goal. So
exactly. Well, I don't see how the next one could be bad because we're reading Herman Melville.
We go from sort of the bubble to the heights of novel writing, honestly. So
we're going to be reading The Confidence Man, a novel that I'm sure will have no uncomfortable parallels to contemporary American life.
And we're going to be joined by my friend Chris, who is a Melville expert, and will be able to sort of elucidate some of the more confusing stuff about Melville, which is always greatly appreciated.
Yeah, so please join us again in 2 weeks for that. Until then, you can follow the show on Blue Sky. Please leave us a 5-star review on your podcast app of choice. It helps us get in front of more people so that we can keep making this wonderful content for you all. If you have questions for the show, or if you have suggestions for episode topics or anything like that, you can shoot us an email at infinitelibrarypod@gmail.com. Until the next one, listeners, honestly, read a book by a Black author if you want to read about race.
Yeah, it's probably a good idea.
Semper books.
Honestly, John, when you put it that way, the fact that he doesn't quote Ishmael Reed correctly should have probably been a tell.
I think I told you that.
Yeah. I think I told you that I read that and I was like, something is rotten in the state of Denmark, and then it ended up being true, basically. Because he's trying to do a joke, but why not just quote Ishmael Reed? Ishmael Reed has many great quotes, so
he's I'd say probably one of our most quotable authors living today.
Thank you for listening to The Infinite Library. If you liked our show, we hope you'll subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the podcast app of your choice. It helps us a lot. If you want to follow us on social media, we can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Infinite Library Pod. If you'd like to contact our team directly with episode ideas or feedback, you can email us at infinitelibrarypod@gmail.com. Our intro music is by Amos Legend in the Forest of Mayhem. Our outro music is by DJ Daggy Diggs, and our logo was created by Lars Noir.